Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr, and this is part 14 and the final part of The Island. And if you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, hit us up at cryptobiography@gmail.com or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. And if I'm a little out of it, it's been a rough morning. Maybe I'll talk about it next week, but as of right now, I just want to get this episode done. So here we go. The family got some food and water supplies together for Carden, and he went alone. He left early in the morning. The sail was a major improvement over the oars, and even though he was going against the current and the winds were only somewhat favorable, the trip that took 3 days the other direction took only 1. He was glad of this, as he might have had to put ashore to sleep. As the sun went down and the sky darkened on a clear sky with light winds, he saw the island roll into view. He had thought through the day of how to handle it. He had already decided there were too many risks with landing at his home's dock. True, almost a month had passed, but they had gotten no news of the island or the town. They could be waiting there. On the far side of the island, on the lee side, there were several docks. The first one was small, but used by only one family, and that one connected to Aoife. There would be room. He would go in there soon, once it got a little darker. Until then, he turned around and went a little further out to sea to make sure he wouldn't be seen. The sky was purple when he turned back, but he could see well enough, and he knew the way well enough, to make it to the dock. When he got there, he saw that the dock was empty. He pulled in, turned the boat around so it was pointing out, and tied it with a knot that he could release with a single pull. He took the sail down and tied it down with a similar knot, but didn't put it completely away. If the wind really kicked up, he might lose the boat, but that didn't seem likely. And he could run back here if it started to. He turned and went to the nearby house. Rowena Ifesbrun and her family lived there. Or so it had been, but the windows were completely dark, as was the crack under the door. It was not an evening for a full island get-together, so far as he knew. He knocked on the door. No one answered. He pushed the door open with a simple, "Hello?" But there was no one inside. It was quite dark, but he took a look around as best he could. The furniture was all here, but there were indications that no one had been there for some time, since they had fled the island. With a knot in his stomach, he left the Eastbrun house and turned towards Aoife's own home, which wasn't far. When he approached, he saw that it was lit up. The building was long and low, rather similar to Carden and Gwen's home, but a good bit larger. For a moment, he felt better. He was about to go up and knock when an idea slid into his head. He backed off and scouted around to find a smallish rock. He got as far back as he could to still reasonably hit the door, right beside a handy hiding bush. Then he threw it. It smacked off the door, and even as he ducked behind the bush, he felt how embarrassed he would be when Aoife or one of her children or grandchildren opened the door. But it wasn't anyone from Aoife's family, or anyone he knew. Instead, a stranger opened the door, some man with a beard. He was wearing pretension clothing. Carden didn't move. Even his breath stopped. The man looked into the darkness, but hearing and seeing nothing, eventually closed the door. He heard voices from within, no doubt asking what the man had found. Carden waited until he was sure the man wouldn't re-exit, then crept away. Night had fully fallen. There was a gibbous moon giving a bit of light, but mostly he made his way by knowing the paths. He went to other families' homes, but they were all similarly either dark or, after peering in a window or two, found that they too contained pretensions. None of these people he knew. Where were all the islanders? He decided that he would have to see what happened at his own home. He walked carefully, but not slowly, along the familiar paths that brought him home. The house was dark. He didn't know if his house might be watched by the pretensions, so he scouted all around. It was quiet. He entered his home. It seemed to be much as they had left it, if somewhat dusty and also damp, there not having been a fire in the fireplace. There was nothing for him here. He left and went to Duncan's home. This was also uninhabited, but Carden decided to do some more searching. After making sure the windows were shuttered on the outside, he went in and found their flint and steel, which was on the mantel. He also found a candle and a bit of dry tinder. He lit the tinder with the flint and the candle from the tinder. Then he tossed the tinder in the fireplace. It was strange being in Duncan's house. Carden had not thought much of Duncan, even before Gwen had decided to bed him. He didn't fully understand her decision. Nor did he understand why Duncan had 2 women living with him. Usually it was the other way around, when it wasn't like Gwen and himself were monogamous. Duncan had not struck him as particularly magnetic, but then he wasn't attracted to men. He looked around. Duncan and his 2 partners had no children as yet, unusual on the island. Perhaps Duncan wasn't able to give a woman a child, Carden wondered. The main room seemed normal, but when Carden stepped into the bedroom, he saw splashes of dried blood everywhere. There were no bodies, but the amount of blood made Carden's breath stop. They must have been killed. Were Aoife and her family killed as well? Were the other families, all over the island, all dead? Blood was now rushing in Carden's ears. Then he realized that he didn't only hear his pumping blood, he also heard people. He put out the candle and went for Duncan's back door. The voices and walking, quite audible over the surf, which wasn't as loud here at Duncan's home, seemed to be coming more from the front door, but they may be surrounding the house, Carden thought. He opened the door and slipped out. He decided to make his way to the east side of the island, the lee side. Then he would only have to turn north along the inner shore and find his way back to the boat. He took a few steps, then heard a shout of alarm behind him. He went at a sprint, hoping he could see well enough to avoid tripping over any rocks or roots on the well-trodden but not even path. He slowed just slightly so he could raise his feet up more in an effort to keep from tripping. There were people behind him, but in the dark, he didn't bother to look behind him. He didn't know if they had seen him. Probably not, but they would get a good enough look at him if they caught up. There seemed to be a lot of them. He heard 1 or 2 shout, as though they had stumbled. It gave him hope, but he knew he was in trouble. It was a good mile to the north end of the island, and he wasn't even on the east side yet. That was a long time to outrun an entire group of people. A few might be as fast but have little wind. They would force Carden to run at top speed, and then as Carden got winded, he would have to stay ahead of those who were conserving their energy but coming along behind. Worse, he didn't seem to be gaining any more of a lead. As he got to the highest part of the island, he knew he was going to have to try something desperate. He felt the start of a stitch in his side, and he knew if he tried to run all the way to his boat, he would be caught. He decided to go straight for the water. The current went up the coast towards his boat, both on the outer and lee sides of the island. If he got in the water with a head start and wasn't caught, he could ride the current back towards his boat. The thought gave him hope and strength, and he found, as he went on the gentle downhill slopes towards the east side, that he was getting a bit more of a lead on the men behind him. Carden wasn't carrying anything besides his knife, which was tied by a thong to his simple breeches. He wasn't even wearing shoes. The bottom of his feet had become rock hard over a lifetime of fishing and island living. He could go straight in the water. The water was also a lot calmer on this side. The waves were smaller. The water also got deep very quickly. It would be cold, but he knew he could stand it for some time. There was just a little bit of a glitter of the water in the distance now, spotted here and there through gaps between the trees when the path allowed it. He knew exactly where he should go in, where the water would let him run in for a while, then become very deep very quickly. Then the water was in front of him. He made for it and soon was splashing through it, less than knee-high, as the small waves broke ahead of him. Then, as he knew it would, it got deep. He dove forward to the last bit of land his feet could touch. Behind him he heard yells as the first few men started splashing in the water. But Carden was now swimming, and he had swum for all of his life. He heard some slashing around him. Some of the men were throwing weapons or perhaps rocks at him, but he wasn't hit. He waited for a particularly big wave to come and ducked under it. When he knew he must be hidden from view from the men behind him, he turned left towards the north and turned towards his boat. He came up only occasionally to breathe, swimming underwater as much as he could. The waves and the buoyancy of the salt water made it difficult, but soon he was sure there was nothing else being thrown at him. He took a moment. He would be hard to spot in the water, in the dark from a distance. But looking back, he could see the group of men silhouetted against the lighter sand on the beach. They seemed to have given up on catching him and were grouping up. Carden knew that after they had checked the shore a bit up and down, they would start looking for a boat. He would have to get to his before they found it. He struck out. The current did help, and it was only perhaps 20 minutes before he saw the dock ahead of him. He made for shore and carefully looked for any sign of the pretensions. But despite his care, as he walked out of the water, only yards from the dock, he heard a cry behind him. It wasn't the entire group that had chased him earlier, but it was 5 pretensions running at him. He took off for the dock and ran down it. He snagged the rope and tugged it so the knot released, and jumped in the boat in a way he knew would also tend to push it away. The men came up behind. 4 stopped, but one decided to go for it and jumped. He landed in the water, but his hand hooked the back of the boat. Carden grabbed the paddle from its place near the bow and turned on the man. He was trying to pull himself in, but Carden swatted the side of his head. Despite all he had seen, he didn't want to kill him, just make him let go. It worked. The man gave a yell, and the boat was free. Carden pulled on the sail's knot and got the sail up. The boat was immediately moving swiftly, aided by both wind and sea currents. The dock slipped behind, and he glanced back to see the 4 men on the dock looking his way, and the 5th swimming back for land. He was exhausted, but he knew he couldn't stop for any reason. The little boat made swift progress, and it was only morning when he pulled back into the dock at the new town. "We must go," Carden explained to Gwen and Aaron as soon as he got to their room. "The whole of the island has been cleared out. I think most of them are dead. They will know that we have gone north. We must go further. We must take the sailboat and go far enough that they won't bother to follow." And they did. Gwen and Carden settled down and resumed their fishing life. Aaron grieved for several years and then found himself a new wife. The children grew up and eventually had families of their own, of several different kinds. Gwen and Carden were pleased, but they also missed their island and had no way of exacting justice for what happened. It was many years until their grandchildren saw pretension again. They had been warned. And that's the end. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any comments or questions, as I say, CryptoBiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter, and thank you for listening. Words and music, copyright 2020, CryptoBiography LLC, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.